So I think what we'll do is we'll start with the tools, because that seemed to get a few more hands. So the hands have it. We'll start with you, please.
I was telling Tyler this is the danger of sitting on the end of the row. You either get the microphone first or last. So here's hoping I say something wise, right? So tools about engaging the reader. We were talking about this before, and there are times when I'm writing where I'm like, what reader? Really? Somebody else is going to read this book besides me? And I just think I'm writing just for myself. And I just write, what's the next most cool thing that could happen? What sounds good to me? And so there are times when I write that I completely ignore the reader altogether. And those scenes sometimes are some of my favorites. There are other times where I'm very conscious about the reader, and I think about, okay, is the scene dragging on too much? Is the dialogue not helping forward the plot? Are the characters acting out of context? And those, then I do step back and think, okay, how can I make this more streamlined? How can I make this more engaging for people on the other side to have the same experience with the story that I'm having actually writing it? And usually that comes, the tools that I use for that, I usually use after I'm done with the draft. I'll do some tinkering in the process of writing, but I usually wait to do heavy editing or restructuring or revising until I'm all the way done with my first draft and I know where the story's going to go. Part of that is because half of my brain has been trained to work as an editor, and so when I'm done being creative and I'm done doing the writing part, I change the way my document looks, and it flips that switch in my brain, and I suddenly can look at the book as an editor, and I look at it differently, and I think to myself, what would I think about this book if it wasn't me? How would I feel about it if somebody else wrote this? What parts would be boring? What parts would I find confusing? What parts would I want more of? And those are the first places that I go back to and try to evaluate what can I do to do more, do less, and adjust from there.
That's great. One of the good things about sitting next to Lisa Mangum is that I can just agree with everything she says. So that's good. As far as tools we use to engage the readers, one of the things that I really like doing is finding elements of my story that are grounded in reality and then make sure that those are spot on. So my book, for example, is about janitors, and there's a lot of, the janitors have like magic powered cleaning supplies, vacuums and mops, and they hunt monsters in schools to defend education. And while the premise of the story is fantasy and there's a lot of magical elements in the book, yeah, it's debatable. The little monsters might be real, but while the story is fantastical, what I think helps engage the reader are the elements that are real. So, describing the school in the best way that I can, so that it feels like a real school. Describing the house or the street or things like that. I guess kind of that. I noticed there's a panel on verisimilitude, and that's just a fancy word for saying kind of describing the real life things. And so I find that helps to engage my readers, and it's very rewarding for me as an author when a kid comes up to me after having read my book and says, "That was fun to read. I could imagine it happening at my school." And then I know that reader was engaged because elements of the story were realistic enough that reader was grounded in those real elements and engaged in that. And then all of the magic and the fantasy and the adventure could happen over the top of that groundwork that had been laid of a realistic base.
Thank you. I'm sorry.
So, let's see.
Good advice. What's your advice?
Read a lot of stuff and be analytical when you're reading other works, and find ways to just, I guess, as you analyze it. We did a panel earlier this morning that talked about that. Just as you're reading, analyze and say, why did this work or why didn't this work, and then just kind of try to mimic that in your own writing. And I think that people. Oh, I just remembered some good advice I could give. All right, here's my best advice. My best advice is, after you've written a manuscript and it's like it's your golden ticket, it's your baby, you're feeling so good about it, the best thing you can do is, once that's on its way, you've started querying with it, write something else. Start writing something else immediately, because janitors was not my first. I had submitted many before, and it was because I had been writing all the time that when they turned down one, I said, well, hey, I happen to have another right here. How about this one? No, this one. And I just I just like threw all my manuscripts at them, and I had a lot because I had
come back
because
every time you cut one off. I got 2 more.
It was the Hydra manuscripts. So, but that's my best advice. I think if people get really, really caught up in their golden ticket and their baby, and they put all of their work into that, and they'll edit it and they'll rewrite it and they'll revise it to death, to the point where they don't even enjoy writing or the process anymore at all. And so at that point, you need to step away, and if that one is at a spot where you can start querying, that's great. And in the meantime, while you're waiting to hear back from those agents, get another idea and get that rolling, and I think that's the best idea that I've ever had.
I totally agree with Tyler. Okay, here's the best advice that I've ever heard, and it's not even mine.
I hope it's mine.
No, Tyler's one set. No, it's from my friend Rick Walton, and I told him when he said this, I said, I am stealing this, I am using it anytime anybody says, what's your best advice? This is the best advice I've heard. This is what he said to aspiring authors. Quit. And if you can't, do the work. Writing is hard. It's joyous. It's terrifying. It's hard work. It is a job. Publishing is hard. Editing is hard. The process is hard. If you can't do it, there's no shame in walking away and doing something else. But if you can't, if there is something inside of you that says, I cannot walk away from this story, I cannot be quiet about this, I have to write it down, I have to do it, then you have to do the work. That's my best advice. I know.
That's good.
Isn't that good?
That's
Thank you.
good advice.
Make sure you attribute that to Rick Walton. Not mine.
Or Tyler Whiteside.
I have 2 things I want to say, and the first one I'll just say very quickly because I think I've said it before, and that is that I think the biggest danger is self-indulgence. We all know when we're having the second brownie or the ice cream or failing to get out of bed in the morning, or we know what self-indulgence feels like. And when we're writing, I think secretly we know what self-indulgence feels like. And we just have to say to ourselves, I know that you love writing about the wind blowing through his hair and everything. Stop that.
Right.
It's, smack. You have work to do, and you are overdoing this. But the other thing that I wanted to say is own what you write and enjoy it. Because a lot of the things that we've talked about today are how to get a book published, and how to make your book as popular as possible, and how to be as successful as possible. And I would just like to remind you to not always write for success. For instance, I think there may be people in the room who write fan fiction. And I feel strongly that fan fiction is largely about indulgence. That's what's great about fan fiction, is you can write about the wind blowing through his hair just as much as you want. And if that's what you want to write, then say, I'm a proud writer of fan fiction. It's what I love to read. It's what I love to write. And if you'd like to share that with me, I'd be happy to share it with you. And if you would like to write incredibly esoteric things like, Philip K. Dick, which turned out to be extremely successful, but not in his lifetime, then I really want you to say, I have 7 people in the world who really love my books. Somebody once asked my husband, who is also technically an author, he's a professor of cognitive science, so of course he has books.
Oh, yeah.
And he said, you don't understand, my books are avidly read by 100 people worldwide. And somebody was saying, who sells more, you or your wife? He's like, this is not even close. But that's the audience that he's writing for. All that matters to him is that he is reaching his audience and they're really happy with what he has to say. And I think that first off and fundamentally, we should write for our audience and be happy if we make our audience happy. And if it turns out that our audience is only 7 people, I still think that that's what you should write. So that was my audience. I think one of the things that we're talking about when we're talking about engaging a reader is how we pace our work. And there are times when, just like you, I need to check my pacing in dead tree form. I can write on the computer and I can do spot checking on the computer. But if I want to know the pacing of my book, I have to print it out and look at it. And I think we all think that we'd like everything to be exciting every minute. But we can come to the end of a roller coaster kind of book and go, maybe that wasn't as fulfilling as I thought it was going to be. And so when I'm checking my pacing, I am sometimes putting in really boring bits on purpose because it slows the reader down. But they have to keep going through the slightly boring business of, I'm describing water erosion in the mountains, because the thing that's going to come next is worth it. But that does put a lot of pressure on me to make sure that the thing that comes next really is worth it. But I think that pacing works better for my books and in many cases for my audience than just trying to keep their attention and their excitement level high all the way through the entire book. They recharge during those slower things. They think their own thoughts while they're getting through that really boring stuff about the irrigation of waterways next to road. And then they recharge and they're ready for the next exciting thing that happens.
I just wanted to echo that about pacing and having hills and valleys. The other day, War of the Worlds was on TV, the Tom Cruise movie. Who saw it? Who liked it? Yeah, I know. It was a long time ago, but what I remembered, because I remember thinking, that was just kind of okay, and we watched it again on TV, and I realized the reason why I didn't really connect with that story, which is a great story, was because it ran at 10 the entire way. Everything was up here, and I never had that relief. I never had that moment of coming down of saying, man, things really are bad. How are we going to get out of this one? Because they just ran nonstop all the way through, and running that high pace disengaged me. I didn't care anymore because the stakes were too high, and I didn't have anything to balance that out against something smaller or something boring but essential, or something that's stopping at Rivendell on your way to Mount Doom. Having those moments where you can pause and stop and catch your breath and then get back into the story.
And eventually, just like you said, if you're running at 10 all the time, 10 becomes the norm, and then the only place to go from there is
actually turn
just
it up to 11.
Yeah, and there's no 11 will break the machine.
And then, I know this doesn't happen to any of you, I'm sure, but in those moments where you're pacing it, do you ever sit down and read that and go, wow, that's kind of boring? No? No. You've never thought of your own work. I'm gonna be honest. Aren't there moments where you're like, wow, you're writing it and you're going, yeah, that's fantastic. Yeah. And then you go back and you're like, what do I do?
Well, number one, my editor does that for me.
What do you do when you're the editor and you're like, it's really boring?
Yeah, but when I wrote a collection of short stories, and then I was going to write a novel. And I was pretty sure, this being my first novel, that 10 years later I would regret it, whatever I did, right? And so I was looking through my potential stories. I picked one that I liked, but that I thought I could do. It was not going to be too complicated. And frankly, if I really messed it up badly, I wouldn't feel that bad. And people have said, since my book came out, that it was a little slow in the beginning. And I'm like, but see, I push my readers. I like to make my readers work, and the payoff is worth it. And I went back a couple years ago and I read it, and I like, whoa, that beginning is slow. That beginning is really slow. So sometimes way too late, we realize that we maybe could have edited that part.
Right. But then just really quickly, I think, and then I want to hear what your thoughts on that, but the Dyson vacuum cleaner man,
Okay.
Please help me. I know you're all like that. Has nothing to do with writing. He said that we produce the best that we can in that moment. And then you have to go back and say, okay, I'm done with that moment, or I've done the next best vacuum, after that. But I think you have to kind of give yourself a moment where you say, well, that was great. Now what can I do? So, anyway.
I have to say that I write about janitors, so the Dyson vacuum man is very applicable.
It all comes together. What I was going to say about that is when Hourglass Door was the first full manuscript I finished, and I was really proud of it, and I was really excited, and I knew it was the best book anybody had ever written in the entire world. And then I printed it out and read it with my editor eyes, and I'm like, oh, who wrote this? And I realized I'm going through and I'm reading, I'm turning the pages, and I'm marking things up, and I realized my action went like this. It's going all the way up, and then it went clunk, and then went way all the way back up, and then it came back down. I thought, well, that's just never going to work. And I realized I had messed up my timeline. And in a time travel novel, that's really bad. And so, go figure. So I had to move some chapters around and change the pacing and change the focus so that I had a more natural arc instead of having that horrible drop off right in the middle of a critical scene.
So do we have any audience questions? Quickly, please.
I hear over and over that, and this is going back to when you were talking about pacing, that every scene and every word essentially has to move the story forward.
And then it doesn't, right?
So I'm just wondering, like, how do you panelists do that even in the slower or the relief scenes? How do you keep the story moving forward even in the lulling
I'm just going to say
times?
really quickly, I think shared experience, because when I was talking earlier about the reader has a creation with you, because the reader has this experience as they read and they think, wow, I'm invested in this moment, in this character, and I think that's really, really important to think about. And it can be quirky or odd. I had a friend that he was writing a girl's character, and I said, well, why aren't your women as quirky as your men? And he's like, oh, but women aren't quirky. Are you kidding me? It's like, well, I thought I wanted to give her 11 toes. Well, give her 11 toes, and give those shared experiences that it can be unusual. And then people will say, oh, yeah, I felt that, or I understand what it is to be quirky. And who wants to? Oh, sorry.
Again, the curse of being on the end. So the question is, what do you do? The advice is always everything in your book, every single word should always propel your story forward. How do you do that even in kind of the slower scenes or the quieter scenes? I think there's a difference between propelling the story forward with action and just propelling the story forward. What does your reader know now at the end of the scene that they didn't know at the beginning? And that could be just character development. It could just be a moment that that you need to have, because later in the story you're going to come back to that and it's going to play a critical role in the story you're developing. It doesn't always have to be, everything's got to just be action oriented. And so I some of it comes with experience, some of it comes with intuition of the kinds of story that you're writing, the voice that you're using. You'll sort of eventually, you sort of get a feel for, is this story is this part of the story helping me know the characters better, reveal something that I didn't know before? And if the answer is yes, then you move forward even a little bit.
I was going to say something, but then I forgot. Right when you handed me the microphone. I'll pass it on.
I was going to say that your slow spots are valuable. You don't get to have that many of them in the book. You need to have some of them. And you always have information that you need to pass on that's not necessarily action or exciting. So they're your perfect opportunity to lay groundwork for something that's going to happen in the future. It's in the slow spot that you introduce a tidbit of information that's going to turn out to be vital somewhere downstream that you couldn't have snuck in at any other time. That you don't want to slow down the action while they're in the lifeboat shooting the rapids or whatever to say, by the way, the manufacturer of lifeboats was known for doing shoddy work. No, but you needed a slow spot in the action sequence somewhere before. That's when you will slide in information. You're going to be a little bit dull anyway. Use that moment to be dull for a good purpose later.
I teach technical writing, and I think one of the things that my students, I'm always trying to get them to understand, and I'm going to apply it to what you just said, is that they need to use white space so that the eye can rest. The eye needs to have a moment to process the information, and I think that's what the slow moments do. So do you, I'm sorry, did you have?
No.
Okay, so do you outline and then plan some of that hook in your outline when you outline and say, all right, in this part, I need to do you do any of that? Do you outline? Because I'm like, it's just like, oh.
No, I don't outline. What I usually do is I sketch.
Okay.
So I sit down and I have an idea of what I'm going to write, and I might do like a 20,000 word or a 30,000 word sketch. And in a lot of places it's a description of the book, like something really exciting has to happen here. Right.
Joke here.
And going back through the drafts that I'm working on right now. Well, in The Thief, yes, insert story here. But now I keep writing little notes to myself. Does anybody else get notes to themselves in their manuscripts? It says, don't skip this bit.
Yeah.
Because there's this impulse when you have a sticky spot to just figure, I'll skip over this scene and I'll get back to it later. Right.
So you don't do that? You don't skip?
I don't outline. I tend more to sketch, and I do make when I'm doing a sketch, I do say things like, this has been so boring for so long. You have to say something exciting here.
Yeah.
And then when I'm going through and going through the draft again, there will be pacing notes that I have written to myself.
That's excellent.
Yeah.
Good job, editor.
Okay, your turn.
I definitely outline. I outline with bullet points, so I just kind of make a page, and these are the events, and this is the chronological order, and then I write them in order. I found that if I skip around too much, I'll just write all the fun parts, and then and then it'll take a lot longer for the book to get written. So if I tell myself that I'm going to start at the very beginning of the story and write it through word for word to the end in order, then I am more motivated to work through some of the tougher spots, because I know that the payout is going to be really fun when I get to write a more exciting spot later on. And this might be getting a little ways away from engaging the reader, but I did want to say, as far as writing and outlining, I think that everybody owes it to themselves to try writing in outlining, and also writing by not outlining, to see what works. Because for the longest time I thought I was not an outliner. I thought I just sit down and it just flows, but it didn't flow. Looking back, it was not so good. But I didn't think I was an outliner, and so I never let myself outline. And then one day I was like, well, I'm going to try to outline a novel and see how it goes, and it went so much better. And from that point on, I knew that I needed to outline everything I did. But I wouldn't have discovered that if I hadn't tried both ways to see what worked better for me. So that's just a little piece of advice that I would throw out there, is try outlining and then try not outlining and see which one works better for you.
You write page 1, word 1, all the way. You're so brave. I don't do that. I didn't start that way. I outline obsessively and draft once, and then I go back and do heavy edits. But the way I outline has differed from book to book, and that was a revelation for me. I wrote Hourglass Door. I drafted, this is what happens in chapter 1, and this is what happens in chapter 2, and then something really cool happens in chapter 3. I'll have to come back to that. And I all the way down. And then I wrote the book out of order, and I wrote the scenes I loved the most, and then I wrote the scenes that I knew were going to be important and had to be in, and then I wrote all the dumb things, and then I stitched it all together, and I cut out the dumb stuff, and suddenly I had a book. And it was like magic. And I thought, cool, now I know how to write a book. That's what I'm going to do for book 2 in the series, right? That's not how I did it for book 2 in the series at all. And I outlined in a totally different way with colored index cards, and I laid them out on the floor, and I moved things around, and then I wrote chapter 1, page 1, word 1, straight through to the end. And I thought, okay, now I know how to write a book. Now that's what I'm going to do for book 3. And that's not what I did for book 3 at all. Not even a little bit. I did summaries. It wasn't even broken into chapters. this is what happens, and then they fight about this, and then somebody will say this really cool line of dialogue that I have in my head, and then they're going to go over here and make sure I bring up this point because that's going to come and be important later, and then they do this and this and this, and something really cool happens here, and don't put the zombies in, and we're going to be all done. And then I wrote it start to finish. But what that taught me was that every book is going to be just a little bit different, and if what worked for you on book 1 isn't working for you for book 2, then it's okay to change your process, and it's okay to outline the next one. It's okay to be a discovery writer on the next one. It's okay to have parts where you do something different. The important thing is however you get those words on the page is what's important. And when I realized that about my own process, I was I felt liberated in approaching my 4th book, which wasn't part of the trilogy and something totally different and had a different feel and a different tone. I felt like, you know what, now I do know how to write a book. It's however I want to write the book is the right way to do it.
Good. Okay, so the next question for this discussion, I want to ask, when it comes to describing a scene, how much is essential and how much is too much? And I'm going to start with you, Megan, because I was reading some stuff. You're like, wow. About, you said that you push your readers, and you left the age of Jen really, really vague for the first little while. Will you talk about that? And talk about, you also did a blog post, you're scared to death.
Scrapping in the headlights.
Like, why? About not telling, which was a really interesting concept. Are you so embarrassed that I even brought this up? Shall I leave it alone?
Addressing the issue of not telling.
Yes.
I write very, very slowly. Each book seems to take longer than the one before, which is partly, I think, aging, and I'm slowing down. And partly, I started my writing when my life was much less complicated. And surprisingly, life, it just keeps getting more complicated and more complicated and more complicated. And those complications slow down my writing. And I watched the author of Harry Potter say what was going to be happening in the next book, and somebody's going to die, right? Yeah. Okay, and I thought, that's one thing to say something sort of exciting and teasing about a book that's going to come out next year. Yeah. It's really not a nice thing to do when you know that people are going to be hanging on potentially for the next 6 years waiting to find out who died, And so in the beginning, I refrained. When people said, what happens in the next book, I would say, I'm not sure yet, and I don't think that, and blah, blah, blah. And then there was an online community on LiveJournal called Soonest, some of whom are sitting there chortling in the front row. And it's not my community. It's a group that formed of people who like to talk about my books. And I watch them talk about my books. And this is a wonderful thing that's happened as a result of the internet. It used to be that you wrote a book, you pitched it out into the unknown, and everybody talked to each other about the book. And they might occasionally write you a letter about the book. But what they wrote was, gee, I loved your book. Right. What I got to see is people talking in detail about my book and trying to figure out things that they didn't understand, and sharing things with each other, and eventually reaching exactly the place I wanted them to be. It was the most rewarding feeling to watch a bunch of people say, what was happening in that scene where he's flipping the coin, and to have somebody else say, oh, well, I think this is what's happening, and somebody else say, or to say, how old is he? Right. Because it doesn't say anywhere in The Thief, how old is he? And then they all argued about it. And everybody presented their own idea. And you got to see how different people have different ideas about the story. They're all the same words on the page. But different people had very different ideas about how old he was. And I had done that on purpose. I wanted people to know my main character from the inside, but not form their impressions of him by how old he is or what color hair he is or hair he has or that sort of thing. I wanted him to feel like somebody that they know, but not necessarily somebody that they know a bunch of facts about. And I wanted them to have the freedom as they read to decide on those facts for themselves. now, as the book goes on, it's been very interesting to see, because you have 11-year-olds who read the book and they think he's 12, you know? And they have I have mail from people who are 16 who assume he's 17, and adults have a tendency to think he's much older. No one could be that articulate and that snarky at like age 15. He must be in his 20s. And as the books go on, it becomes more clear, or there's a little less wiggle room to decide how old he is. So 11, by the second book, 11 is pretty much right out. But that's one of the things that I specifically want to give the readers, and I don't know, I guess that does fall under the category of engaging the readers, because they're thinking about it and they're deciding that for themselves. How old is he? He's as old as I want him to be. That's how old he is.
Well, and sorry, I'm going to grab it out of here. And also, because the reader is part of the creator with you with the story, you know, that's a really important thing, because they all create, you know, the author can say, well, this is what this is, and you think, well, not in my head, you know. And anyway, what do you think, Tyler and Lisa? How much, in describing a scene, how much is essential? How much is too much? Is there a way to tell?
So is this in writing then?
Yes.
Like as we're writing a scene, how much do we decide to leave out? That's tough to say.
Say something good, because I'm just going to agree with you.
Oh, okay. I was thinking the same. So basically, I just kind of write the scenes, and if it feels boring to me, then I'll scale back on where it's boring. Or a lot of the time I think that maybe you say something and you say it 3 times in 3 paragraphs, and so maybe all of those could be combined into one glorious paragraph. And it's up to you to decide how to do that, but I find myself doing that a lot of the time. I will say something about a character, and 2 sentences later I will essentially say the same thing, just different words. The words are in a different order, and at that point, yeah, that's I'm giving them too much. I'm beating the dead horse there, you know, and so I need to take out and make my writing more succinct and direct, I guess.
Because I'm an editor, one of the rules of proofreading and editing is, I read this in an article the other day, first do no harm, which is really good as a proofreader, and you know, as part of my job as an editor is I'm not supposed to make the book worse, right? I'm supposed to help make the book better. That as an editor, and as an author, I think that's my job too. I'm supposed to make the book better. So if I'm writing something, and first of all, I agree with Tyler. I told you I would. That if the scene is boring to me, chances are it's going to be boring to somebody else, and I better do something about that. But if the idea, if the scene, if the moment, if the description is not helping, I have to ask myself, is it hurting? Am I harming the story by having it in here? Maybe the answer is no. Maybe it's fine to just have a break and no harm, no foul, you can leave it in. But if I look at it and say, if it's not helping, then is it hurting the book? And if it's hurting the book, then I've got to take it out, because my first rule is to do no harm.
Just as a clarification, I think earlier we were talking about how we want to slow down the book so it's not all breakneck speed, but now we're saying, you know, scratch the boring parts and ramp it up. And so I think that we need to maybe think of a difference between saying that a scene there's a slow moment in the story versus a boring moment in the story, because the moment can be slow, and that's okay. You need those slow moments so that your readers can breathe, so that your characters can breathe, so that you can really process what's going on. But if your slow moments are boring, then you're in trouble. Boring is like you can't even get through, you know, the sentence, or yeah, do I have to read this? Or you find yourself just skimming ahead. It can be slow, but if it's written well, the slow moments can still be very interesting. So I think that maybe is worth clarifying the difference between a slow moment and a boring moment.
I just wanted to add that I read an article once from the New York Times and have been kicking myself for years now that I didn't pay attention to who wrote it. The person writing the article was talking about music. And studies have shown, now that we have all of these wonderful tools for testing people as they listen to music, that there are many notes in a piece written by Beethoven or written by Mozart that aren't actually written. They're not on the sheet music. No instrument plays that note, but you hear it anyway. And if you listen, you will be certain that you heard those notes. And that Beethoven, I believe it was Beethoven, it's been a long time and that's why I'm kicking myself that I can't go reread this article, that you can take those notes out of the piece and people will still hear them. And what I try to do when I'm writing, and I've written 3 pages of text, is go back and take out all of the things that people will hear anyway. Even if you don't, I don't know, have any of you had the experience of going back to a favorite book and remembering that really fabulous scene where at dawn they loaded up the horses and went through the woods and everything was glorious and yada yada yada, and you get to that scene and it's 2 sentences long? You're like, wait, that was days of reading that I remember from that. And it's because your brain filled in the light flickering through the trees and the sound of the birds and the moss growing on the roots and all of that stuff from just those 2 sentences. So when I'm writing, I try to take out as everything that I can that people will construct anyway on their own. But no advice about writing is good for all writing. There are lots of books where you just enjoy every single word, and what you're enjoying is the words on the page. And not necessarily because you can't do that work for yourself, but because the person writing it is so wonderful to read.
Excellent. Good. I'm going to ask another question, changing gears. I want to ask just for a moment about novice writers. And what are some things that they do? I'm going to start with you, Lisa, as an editor. Yeah, so it's Tyler's turn to agree. What are some things that novice writers do that are mistakes at the beginning of their novel?
They don't engage.
They don't engage.
Yeah.
I think sometimes they start in the wrong spot. I think they start on action that's lame. They don't demonstrate good voice or strong, something that's catchy. I mean, I think about this is the example I always give, because you all do this. And when you go to the bookstore, you have 100,000 choices, and how you have $15 or $20 in your pocket to spend. How do you know which book to buy? Well, you go to the section that you usually like to read. You maybe find an author that you usually like to read. You read the back cover copy, and you read sort of the first page. And you make a decision on if you're going to fork out your $20 and buy the book. And that's what I do when I go through the slush pile, when I'm looking at a new manuscript. I see, is it a category that I'm kind of interested in? Is it from an author maybe that I know or is like? I read the back cover copy, the query letter. I read the first page. And I make a decision. Is this something that I think the company should fork over X amount of dollars to buy and publish? And so the way that you pick out books to read is the same way that other people are picking out your books to buy. So read your book, read your first couple pages and say, would I buy this book in Barnes & Noble? Would I pay $15 or $25 or $30 for this? And if not, what is it about it that turns you off? And those will probably be some of the same problems that other people will see. And it's usually things like, it's kind of a slow beginning, or I don't immediately engage with the character, or I'm not, there's just something about it that's not quite right. Now, having said that, I don't want to make it sound like there are hard and fast rules. Never start with the weather, because if it's the first time it's rained in 400 years, maybe you start with the rainstorm. And maybe that's really important. So I don't want to say that there are hard do's and don'ts, but make sure that that real estate that you have on the first page, those first few paragraphs, are your very best foot and your very best writing, because that's going to be what makes me want to read page 2 and page 3 and all of chapter 1 and all of chapter 2 and pull me in. That probably didn't answer the question at all, did it?
It did.
Okay.
You've answered it so well, I have nothing to say.
You totally agree with me.
I totally agree with you. Well, maybe I could pull something out here. I think when you mentioned voice, and voice is kind of, narrative voice is hard to explain. It's just kind of the way we arrange our words in a sentence and that kind of the style. And I think that sometimes I know for myself, when I'm starting a new manuscript with new characters that I've never written for before, and as I've already said, I start at the very beginning and I write all the way through. So sometimes it takes me a while to actually master this character's voice or kind of the voice of this particular story. And so my first chapter is not a glowing example of the voice that is illustrated throughout the rest of the book. And at that point, I need to go back and make sure that now, after writing 50 or 60,000 words in this narrative voice, now it's honed. Now it's a well-oiled machine that I can go back to chapter 1 and rearrange it so that it matches well the rest of the voice. That wouldn't happen if you write out of order like some crazy authors I know, but I write, from the beginning to the end. So for me, that is an issue sometimes.
One thing that I try to do now, that I frequently fail to do, but I try to do, is write the beginning and then keep going. Because I think one of the easiest mistakes to make is to rewrite your beginning to death. You have now gone over the first 4 paragraphs of your novel 18 times,
right.
And you've completely desensitized yourself to everything in it, and so everything looks kind of gray and mushy and extremely boring. And I pick up books sometimes in the bookstore, and I read the first 4 paragraphs, and they're not really working for me, but I'll just read a couple more pages, and suddenly there is that voice. So I try to write it and then leave it, and it doesn't matter how bad it is. I just leave it, just keep going, and when I have gotten the voice and I'm really in the groove and I know what I'm doing and the whole rest of the book is taken care of, that's the time to go back to the beginning and rewrite it one time.
Yeah.
And hope that it stays fresh, and then it goes off to the editor.
That's a great follow-up comment.
Please.
That was a great comment there. I think that the temptation is to not go on to chapter 2 until chapter 1 is perfect.
Right.
But of course we know that we're just going to dwindle away into nothing if we do that, because we'll just be sitting at the computer forever.
The more you write it, the worse it gets.
Yeah. So definitely there is something to developing some momentum while you're writing and kind of pushing through so that things flow together nicely.
Excellent. So I have a not trick question, but maybe a difficult question. How do you edit yourself? Do you have any tactics that you use? Excellent. Oh, come on. A cake.
I mentioned this a little bit when I talked about Hourglass Story and the fact that I have that sort of switch in my head. This again was an important thing for me. I write in Times New Roman 12-point type, and I edit in Verdana 12-point type. And I've done that. And it's because when I was learning my craft as an editor, that's how somebody taught me how to do it. They said, this is what you do, and here's how you prepare your manuscript, and this is what you want it to look like, and here's how you do it. So when I see that change in format, it changes the way I interact with the material. And I didn't realize that until I was done writing Hourglass Story, and I started to do the edit. I'm thinking, oh, this will be easy, right? This is what I do for a living. I should do this, and I couldn't do it. I kept getting bogged down. I kept trying to write and fix, and I couldn't see the big picture. And I thought, okay, I'm going to treat this like it just showed up on my desk. What would I do? The first thing I do is I change the format. And as soon as I did that, as soon as I changed the presentation, I changed the way I thought about the book. So it may not work for everybody, but it's worth considering that when it comes time to edit, if you train yourself to do your editing in a different format, in a different font, do it on paper, do it in a different place in your house, do it at the library, do it someplace that is separate from where you created the material, you will have a different reaction and a different response to that material, and you can look at it with slightly clearer eyes. I think it's also important to wait. Don't finish right the end and then say, now I'm going to edit the whole book. Put it down, walk away, come back to it, and change your environment and change your experience with it. And you'll see things that you would otherwise have never seen.
I also try to read it entirely aloud from start to finish, which can be kind of hard on your voice after lots of hours of editing. But I try to read it aloud because there are certain words that I will repeat that maybe use the same word twice in a sentence and not notice it visually, but when I say it, I quickly realized that needs to be changed. So I read aloud to help me self-edit.
And because all of you are going to have Jim Dale narrate your books, because you're all going to get published, you got to read it aloud to hear it. You're not believing me, but I'm serious. Because when you read it aloud, it's like getting that different format. You hear things and you hear the way that a sentence is phrased. And yeah, it slows the reading down. And have other people listen to you as you read. That is really, really helpful. Not just your mom, but someone.
And embarrassing.
It can be embarrassing, but it's very worthwhile. Yeah.
I just want to say the most important thing for me in terms of editing is what you said, that the book has to go into the box for some time, and usually the longer the better. That's my editor sobbing in the distance. But I need to put it away and not think about it. It has to age in the drawer before I get it back out, and for that reading, then I do it on paper.
Like a fine wine or cheese.
Well, I only wish it got better in the box. I mean, wouldn't it be great if you could put your draft in the drawer and wait 7 years and it comes out gorgeous? Yeah, that's my dream too. Also, that I will go and open up my computer and there will be more book there than there was when I closed it the night before. It hasn't happened yet, but I'm still hoping. But it is really important for me both to read it on paper instead of on the screen. Everything looks better on the screen. All the bad stuff just flows away.
Right.
Whereas on the paper, it's right there.
Right.
Then it stays longer somehow. But most important of all is to take my head out of the book, because then I can see what's there on the page instead of what I think is there,
Right.
because it's in my head.
And grab that red pen. Pretend you're your English teacher. Grab the red pen. Sorry.
I just want to say I like to change my font to Wingdings.
Also, make sure that you look at the difference between an ebook and a paper book, because they are put together differently. And so the font change can change it all. The way that it looks on paper rather than on your computer, completely different. You can catch things that you wouldn't have caught any other way.